Good evening, everyone. Thanks so much for being here, whether you're here with us live or watching later. My name is Kate Venturini. I am a staff member with the University of Rhode Island College of the Environment and Life Sciences, and more specifically, Cooperative Extension, who is hosting this next educational webinar in our Learn at Home series, which we started in April of 2020. Tonight, we are very lucky to have a local legend with us, Mary Louise Weezie Nora, who should get a kick out of that. And we're gonna have Wires with Weezie, Demystifying New England's Energy Infrastructure webinar. And Weezie is the state policy director now for New England with Dominion Energy. And we are really grateful to her for being here. And before I kick things off and pass the baton, I'd like to tell you a little bit about Extension briefly. Next slide, please. So Cooperative Extension is a unique part of our land grant institution, and actually Extension exists in every state at each land grant institution. In Rhode Island, we're it at URI, and one of the things we pride ourselves on is that we are responsible for bringing the science-based resources of the university to the people of Rhode Island, communities in Rhode Island, and we've been doing this for over 100 years. Some of our strategic areas of focus include land stewardship, food systems and agriculture, water resources, healthy lifestyles, and the focus of tonight's presentation, which is energy efficiency, conservation, and renewables. The COVID-19 pandemic has presented a few silver linings for us in that we're able to reach people in the comfort of their own homes with this information. And so we would just ask that if anything you hear tonight would be of interest to anyone in your life, please feel free to share the recording that will be up on our YouTube channel after the fact. We want to make sure that folks who need information we have are able to get it. So thank you in advance for that. Next slide. And finally, just a couple housekeeping items. You will notice if you click the three dots on the bottom right corner of your screen, there's a Q&A option. That is actually where we would prefer that you enter questions for Weezie and for Jack Miniotti, who Weezie will introduce in a bit. The chat function is a great place for folks to tell us their name and where they're from, but the Q&A is a better place for questions. So please enter your questions throughout the night there. And also after the webinar, you will be sent a link to a survey. The survey is meant to help us figure out how the information we've shared with you tonight has impacted you in your life. And we really appreciate the feedback you provide through that survey. It only takes 2 minutes or so. So thank you. If you receive a weird email from WebEx, it's from me, and I really want to hear your opinion. So thanks for filling that out in advance. And finally, as I mentioned, this session is being recorded. It will be posted as a recording on our YouTube channel, and that recording will be closed captioned for the hearing impaired. So we're very, very grateful to have you all here tonight. Next slide, please. I'd love to introduce you to Weezie, who is formerly the Senior External Affairs Representative at ISO New England up in Western Mass. They are our independent grid operator. And she's now transitioned to a role as the State Policy Director for the New England region at Dominion Energy in Waterford, Connecticut. She also serves as the president of a amazing organization called the New England Women in Energy and Environment. I've had the privilege of attending many of NUE, as we fondly call its events, and Weezie is well respected in the community, and we are very grateful to have her tonight. So without further ado, I will pass it over to Weezie, and I hope you all enjoy. Thanks so much.
Thank you so much, Kate, and thank you for that introduction. Local legend is awfully generous. I'm thrilled to be here tonight with all the folks at URI. I have a special place in my heart for the URI energy fellows. They came to visit me each summer at ISO New England for a control room tour. So I was always so inspired to see the students and have them soak in all the information about the regional grid, and they had such good questions to ask. So I hope this is an informative presentation and sets the stage for many more sessions through URI's Cooperative Extension Program. And this one, of course, is titled Wires with Weezie. So we're going to demystify New England's energy infrastructure today and just step through it, and hopefully you'll understand better, why when you flip the switch at your home or your business, the lights turn on. So, the first question you're probably asking is, what is the New England electric grid? What is the grid? When I first joined ISO New England 8 years ago, I thought, what exactly do you mean by the grid? And I quickly learned that it's the New England electric grid it's a tightly interconnected system of generation infrastructure, transmission infrastructure, and distribution infrastructure that's ultimately used to serve the electricity needs of homes and businesses across the region, so consumers. All of them are absolutely necessary and important pieces of this puzzle that we call the electric grid. And I'm gonna walk through each of them separately and break it down so that we demystify it. So I'll start first with the region's installed generation. So generation infrastructure, obviously very important to the region. These are the power plants, essentially, that are producing power and putting power onto the grid. There are roughly 350 generators or power plants installed across New England, and they amount to roughly 31,500 megawatts of generating capacity. And just a rule of thumb, 1 megawatt of generating capacity can serve the electricity needs of roughly 1,000 homes. So that gives you an idea of what 31,500 megawatts of generating capacity can do. I'll just highlight one generator that's near and dear to my heart. That's Millstone Nuclear Power Station, located in Waterford, Connecticut. That is the asset that Dominion Energy owns up here in New England, and it accounts for roughly 2,100 megawatts of carbon-free generating capacity. So it's capable of serving more than 2 million homes across Connecticut and the region, really. So this, is an important resource. It's, one of the 350 generators scattered across New England. And in addition to nuclear power plants here in New England, we've got natural gas-fired power plants, we've got coal and oil-fired power plants, we have wind facilities, we have solar facilities, we have hydroelectric facilities, and all of those resources, all of those generators are what make up the installed generation here in New England. And the power that these resources are producing are the power is put onto the high voltage transmission system. There are more than 9,000 miles of high voltage transmission lines crisscrossing the New England region. And these transmission lines are what transport power to every corner of New England. We've got 345 kV transmission. You can see that in the blue lines on the map to your right. That's really the backbone of the New England transmission system. It's the interstate highway system for electricity and moving large amounts of power across the region. We also have a small smattering of 230 kV transmission. Those are the green lines in the map on the right-hand side of the slide. And then we've got 115 kV transmission here in New England as well. Those are the red lines on the map. And all of those transmission lines amount to roughly 9,000 miles of high voltage transmission that's moving large quantities of power around the region. We're also connected to neighboring power systems in Eastern Canada and New York. So we're not an energy island. We rely heavily on our neighbors for imports of power into New England. We're connected through 13 different transmission ties to these neighboring power systems. So 9 transmission lines interconnect us with New York. You can see along the border of New York and New England, and then we also have the DC transmission line that connects us over to Long Island. We've got 2 DC direct current transmission lines connecting us to Hydro-Quebec, and we've got 2 AC lines connecting us to New Brunswick. So the flow of power over these lines is really based on need and economics. So if a power plant trips offline in New England and we needed a surge of energy into the region, that power would flow in over the ties into the New England region until we could pick up generation here in New England to account for the loss of that generator. Also, if power prices are very high in New England, you'll oftentimes see power flowing over those transmission lines into the region because folks are interested in selling power into New England. And last year, actually 19% of the region's energy needs were met by imports of power. Most of that, I will tell you, is coming from Hydro-Quebec over those 2 DC ties, particularly the one at the top right. That's called the Phase 2 transmission line that we have with Hydro-Quebec, and it's rated to carry up to 2,000 megawatts of power into the region. It's typically only carrying about 1,200 to 1,500 megawatts of power each hour, but a massive high voltage direct current transmission line that's bringing power down from eastern Canada into the region. Most of that power is large scale hydro. The Hydro-Quebec system is almost all hydropower. So, you know, a clean source of energy coming in from our neighbors to the north. And I will just say that all of this is managed, the flow of power over the high voltage transmission system, all of that is managed by ISO New England. And I'll encourage you to visit the ISO New England website. There's a ton of information there. And I'll just talk briefly about the ISO. I was there for, you know, roughly 7.5 years, and they're located, as Kate mentioned, in Western Massachusetts, in Holyoke, Mass. And they are tasked with running the wholesale power market in New England, operating the high voltage transmission system and dispatching generation across the region to meet electricity demand here in New England, and planning for our future energy needs 5 and 10 years into the future. So they're regulated by the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, and those are some big responsibilities that ISO New England is tasked with, and it was a real pleasure working with them in my prior role as a senior external affairs representative. So I encourage you to go visit the website to learn more. And as I mentioned, ISO New England, it's the independent system operator. That's what ISO stands for here in New England. And so it's responsible for keeping the flow of electricity going across the 6-state region. And as I mentioned, they're also responsible for making sure there's competitively priced electricity today and into the future. So they're designing the wholesale power markets to make sure that there's a level playing field for all the resources here in New England to compete to provide power to meet the demand for electricity. So once the power is generated by power plants across New England, put onto the high voltage transmission system, spread around the region, it eventually reaches substations where that power is stepped down in voltage and fed into the lower voltage distribution systems. And these distribution systems are managed by local electric distribution companies like National Grid. National Grid, Eversource, Central Maine Power, all of those electric distribution companies, they're the ones responsible for making sure the power is actually flowing to your homes and businesses. So ISO New England, they're responsible for making sure that the power is flowing reliably and efficiently over the high voltage power system. It's the electric distribution companies that are responsible for making sure that the power is flowing reliably to homes and businesses across the region. The EDCs are also responsible for managing the interconnection of distributed energy resources like rooftop solar. Those resources help meet local energy needs. You know, if you install rooftop solar on your home, you know, those solar panels will help your home meet those local energy needs, and you won't have to draw as much electricity from the regional electric grid. So the installation of those types of resources actually reduce overall grid demand in aggregate as solar is put on more and more rooftops and across fields in New England. And finally, what's driving the demand for electricity? Well, of course, it's the 7 million retail electricity customers here in New England. We've got a population of roughly 15 million. We saw our all-time summer peak demand. That's the most electricity we've ever needed in a moment in time. We saw that all-time summer peak demand set back in August 2006 after like a 3 or 4 day heat wave, and it topped out at roughly 28,000 megawatts. We are a summer peaking system here in New England, which means we see the highest electricity demand in the summertime, and that's driven mostly by air conditioning. That draws quite a bit of electricity from the grid. We see smaller peaks in the winter. Our all-time winter peak demand was set back in January 2004 at close to 23,000 megawatts. Like I said, we see smaller peaks in the winter, but the winter also comes with its own set of challenges, which I'll discuss a bit later. What's really striking about these numbers, though, the 28,000 and the 23,000, is that we haven't seen them, and we haven't even come close to them in over a decade. And why is that? Well, it's all the investments that we've been making, all of us as consumers across the New England region, in energy efficiency. And it's all the solar more recently that we've been installing behind the meter to help reduce peak demand growth here in New England. So those investments are paying off. We're seeing much smaller peaks in the winter and in the summertime, and that's really due to the robust programs in place, you know, at the state level through National Grid, through Eversource, through other electric distribution companies to make energy efficiency improvements and promote installation of resources, behind the meter resources like solar. You know, I will say while those two factors are reducing peak demand growth, I will just say that, you know, we are looking to electrify the heating and transportation sectors here in New England to get at some of our decarbonization goals. So that could put upward pressure on demand for electricity over time. So something to watch. We've seen electricity demand decline over the years because of EE and solar, but you know, electrification of other sectors of the economy could put upward pressure on electricity demand as we see increased penetration of EVs and heat pumps and the like. So let's just take a look at where our electricity comes from. These are the sources of electricity here in New England, going back all the way to 2000. So this chart's fascinating. You can see that our electricity is coming from a variety of resources, but that resource mix is changing. Back in 2000, only 13% of our electricity was being sourced by natural gas-fired power plants. Today, that's closer to 40%. So you can see that we've added a lot of natural gas-fired resources to the system. I will say that these are, you know, some of the highest performing, most efficient resources anywhere in the country, and they're displacing a lot of the older coal and oil-fired resources that were installed on the system. You can see back in 2000, coal and oil-fired resources accounted for 15 and 19% respectively of the resource mix. That number has declined to less than 1%. So those resources are not really running. They only run when it's very, very hot out or it's very, very cold out. Otherwise, they're just sitting idle. And because of that, many of them are retiring from the system. You can see here that nuclear has kind of held steady. It accounts for roughly 25% of the resource mix. So nuclear, 25% of electricity here in New England. Net imports of power from our neighbors has increased a bit, 19%, as I mentioned, most of that coming in from Eastern Canada, from Hydro-Quebec, in the form of large-scale hydropower. And you can see small increases in renewables and hydro. What we have seen a huge increase in is solar, and much of that is being installed behind the meter. And by that, I mean behind the customer meter. So, at ISO New England, they don't see all of the individual solar installations across the region. They are just seeing reduced demand for electricity on the grid. So this is a day in May, this past year, it was actually May 2nd, 2020, and you can see how much behind the meter solar is changing the load profile. It's pretty staggering. So the top dashed gray line is what the demand for electricity would have been if we didn't have any of this solar, any of this behind the meter solar installed across the region. It would have been close to 11,500 megawatts of demand. Instead, all of the behind the meter solar, rooftop solar and other solar installations, instead, they were helping meet local energy needs. And what ISO New England was witnessing in the control room was the solid gray line at the bottom. And that was the regional demand for electricity. At about 1:30 in the afternoon, grid demand was reduced by 3,200 megawatts because of all of the solar that was basically meeting local energy needs at that time. Without that solar, ISO New England would have had to dispatch 3,200 megawatts of more generation in order to meet the demand for electricity. They didn't need to do that. One other thing I'll point out, in terms of changing the load profile, you can see that, solar, as the sun's coming down, you can see that it falls off the system pretty quickly, and there's quite a steep ramp up in the demand for electricity with that solid gray line at the bottom. That can present a challenge for operators at ISO New England. They're having to ramp up generation very quickly in order to meet that demand for electricity. People are coming home, they're turning on their television, they're starting to cook dinner, if they're like me, they're putting it in the microwave. And all of that is quickly increasing demand for electricity on the grid. So ISO New England is having to really ramp up resources in order to meet that as the solar is coming off the system and the sun is setting. So just some operational aspects to be aware of with the installation of all this behind the meter solar. And what are some of the other resources of the future? One other big responsibility that ISO New England has is administering what's called the ISO generator interconnection queue. So any large-scale power plant, any large-scale resource that wants to interconnect to the system has to go through ISO New England. And ISO New England has to study that resource and make sure it can interconnect reliably. And right now there's over 20,000 megawatts of proposed generation in the ISO queue. That's a lot. I told you earlier that the whole New England system, installed generation, is at roughly 31,500 megawatt system. So 20,000 megawatts in the queue is a lot. Not all of that will get built, but it is a really good indication of where there's interest and what's on the horizon for New England. And for this region, it's more renewables. You can see that 61% of the queue, over 12,000 megawatts of proposed wind, and most of that is offshore wind. You've all probably heard about the the exciting developments around offshore wind. Rhode Island obviously knows well. You have the first offshore wind farm in the country, the Block Island wind farm, 30 megawatt facility off the coast of Block Island. We're seeing a lot of interest in offshore wind here in New England, particularly from the southern New England states. You can see on the right-hand side of the slide that there are over 7,000 megawatts of proposed offshore wind resources looking to interconnect into the Massachusetts coastline, close to 900 megawatts of offshore wind proposed and looking to interconnect into Rhode Island, and over 3,000 megawatts of offshore wind proposed and looking to interconnect into Connecticut. So it's pretty amazing to see how much interest there is from developers, and we'll see how it all plays out. Quite a bit of interest in solar. These are the large-scale solar resources that would be interconnecting to the high voltage system that would require a study by ISO New England. These are not the behind the meter resources that are going through the electric distribution company study process, their queues. Quite a bit of storage proposed here in New England. I'd say a few years ago, there was zero storage being proposed, but that would be, a great resource, to balance out renewables. So there's quite a bit of interest in developing storage as well. Natural gas only accounts for 8% of the queue. I'd say 5 or 6 years ago, proposed natural gas was roughly 2/3 of the queue. So natural gas was really the predominant resource proposed here in New England, but that has really shifted, and we're seeing most of the queue made up of renewables and storage, and so that's where there's interest, and it's pretty exciting to see. There's even interest further down the coastline. This is a photo from the installation of Dominion Energy's 12 megawatt coastal Virginia offshore wind pilot project that was completed this summer. It was just a 2-turbine project. It's really just a pilot project that's preceding a much larger commercial project. Dominion is in the process of developing a 2,600 megawatt offshore wind farm off the coast of Virginia Beach, and has plans to install 5,200 megawatts of offshore wind by 2035. So some ambitious goals by the state of Virginia, and I'll talk about some of those goals in the New England states as well. Some ambitious goals in New England for offshore wind and decarbonization generally here in the region. So what are the predominant energy issues facing New England? I wanted to close with some of the hot topics in the industry, and these are just 4 of them. There are many other issues that we're tackling here in New England, but one big issue, major initiative by the New England states, by many of the New England states, is decarbonization of the electric transportation and heating sectors. So all the New England states have ambitious goals for carbon reduction. Many of them are getting at those goals through the electric sector, and many states are looking to electrify the transportation and heating sectors to accomplish those goals as well. Another big issue, integration of intermittent renewable resources. So, one strategy for the New England states to reach their decarbonization goals is to develop more renewable resources to interconnect to the grid. And so there's, you have to think through how those resources are integrated, how these resources are integrated reliably. And then, the third issue I wanted to highlight was expansion of energy infrastructure. So as we develop more renewable resources, what infrastructure will be needed to interconnect those to the high voltage transmission system? Many of these resources are located in remote areas. So we have to think about, some of the siting challenges involved, how much of that energy we're going to need, and, maybe even the cost associated with expanding energy infrastructure in order to unlock some of those resources. And then finally, I'll just touch on, some of the retirements we're seeing across the region and what that means for energy security here in New England. And so starting with decarbonization, this is obviously a major policy priority for several New England states. They're looking to decarbonize the electric sector as well as their transportation and heating sectors. I think the transportation sector is now the largest contributor to greenhouse gas emissions now, with quite a bit of progress made in the electric sector already. And here's just, some highlights from Rhode Island, Connecticut, and Massachusetts, the three southern New England states. You can see evidence of this. Governor Raimondo, she issued an executive order earlier this year that calls for 100% renewable electricity by 2030. I believe that's the most ambitious electric sector goal of any state in the United States. So a very ambitious goal, and I believe they're studying pathways. The Office of Energy Resources working very hard to study pathways for reaching that goal by 2030, and we'll be presenting those to the governor very soon. Connecticut, Governor Ned Lamont, he issued an executive order back in September 2019 that called for a 100% zero carbon electric sector by 2040. And the Connecticut Department of Energy and Environmental Protection is in the midst of completing its integrated resources plan and its clean energy pathways analysis, looking at various scenarios and various pathways for meeting that 2040 electric sector goal. And then Massachusetts Governor Charlie Baker, in his State of the Commonwealth address earlier this year, he committed the state to achieving net zero carbon emissions economy-wide by 2050. So not just the electric sector, but all sectors of the economy, reaching net zero carbon emissions by 2050. So these are ambitious and worthy goals, and you can see a lot of thought being put into how we will reach those goals in the most reliable way, most cost-effective way. These three states are all studying various pathways for reaching those ambitious goals. And, there's a lot of companies like Dominion who have set similar goals. We've set a net zero carbon and methane emissions goal by 2050 for our electric and natural gas distribution operations. So, we're all in this together, and we're all looking to reach the same decarbonization goals. And so I highlight those as something to watch. It's really driving a lot of the decisions here in New England. And one of those is investing in more, renewable resources. So the integration of intermittent renewable resources here in New England is another major energy issue facing New England. And ISO New England has given this a lot of thought. They're the grid operator, and they've adapted their markets, their operations, their planning to accommodate and integrate high levels of renewable resources and high levels of smaller distributed energy resources like solar. They've improved their short-term and long-term forecasting for wind and solar resources so that they can ensure that they have a good handle on how much wind and how much solar is going to show up on any given day. And they need to know, what will the wind resources do tomorrow? What will the solar resources do tomorrow? So they have, of course, forecasts. They're forecasting the weather, they're forecasting electricity demand, and they're, aligning the forecast with what's needed in terms of power generation for the next day. ISO New England has also issued for the last, I'd say, 5-6 years, a long-term solar PV forecast, and their 2020 forecast showed, I think, roughly 3,500 megawatts of solar installed across the region, most of that behind the meter solar, and they're forecasting by 2029 close to 8,000 megawatts of solar. So they need to know, where the states are heading with their policy goals, how much solar will be installed over time in order to plan the system 5 and 10 years into the future. So this is something that ISO New England has been working on for some time now, and also looking to improve their wholesale market design to make sure that all of these resources, renewable resources, storage resources, other emerging technologies, to make sure that they can all participate on a level playing field in the region's wholesale electricity market. So there have been a number of changes to make sure that they can participate and help contribute to meeting demand for electricity here in the region. The next issue I wanted to highlight was expansion of energy infrastructure. We know that the New England states have very ambitious carbon reduction goals, and to meet some of those goals, it will likely require expansion of the region's transmission system and development of additional clean energy resources. So we know there are incredible offshore wind resources off the coast of Massachusetts and Rhode Island. What will we need to do to the transmission system to ready it for these large supplies, these large injections of offshore wind into southeast Massachusetts and into Rhode Island? We know that there are large quantities of onshore wind resources in northern Maine. But unfortunately, in northern Maine, there are very few people up there. So there's not a very robust transmission system. So if you wanted to develop an onshore wind farm up in northern Maine, it might take you 100 miles to reach the transmission system. That would be a 100-mile transmission line just to tap into the regional power system. So there are major infrastructure costs involved with doing that. We also know that there's a great supply of large-scale hydro resources up in Hydro-Quebec. In fact, Massachusetts has approved contracts for large-scale hydro to come down from Hydro-Quebec and cut through the state through a transmission line, cut through the state of Maine, and be fed into the larger New England transmission system. That proposal, that transmission project, is facing a lot of opposition. So there are some serious siting challenges involved with expanding the energy infrastructure here in New England, particularly the transmission infrastructure, but even the resources like onshore and offshore wind that we're looking to develop here in New England. So a lot of questions to answer: where they're going to be located, what are the interconnection issues involved, what are the siting challenges involved, and how much will we need? There are studies right now saying we're going to need thousands of megawatts of renewable energy each and every year in order to meet our long-term decarbonization goals. So we've got to answer these questions if we want to meet those goals, and particularly if we want to meet those goals reliably and cost-effectively. And finally, I'll just mention retirements. That's another issue that I wanted to highlight. Since 2013, roughly 7,000 megawatts of generation have retired or announced plans for retirement in the coming years. This is predominantly the older coal and oil-fired resources across the region, but some nuclear power stations have retired as well. And I'll just say that those resources have played and will continue to play an important role when natural gas supplies are constrained coming into New England. We only have so many interstate pipelines feeding the region, and in the wintertime, those pipelines can be constrained, and it can be tough to get gas to some of the natural gas-fired resources across the region. And in those cases, ISO New England is often leaning on some of the older coal and oil-fired resources to help meet the demand for electricity. So something to think about as well. As we transition the power system from some of the older fossil fuel-fired resources to cleaner resources. And there's a lot of questions to answer along the way. And I just think we're in this together, and we should all work together to reach our shared policy goals as we witness this energy transformation. So with that, I will just remind folks to enter their questions into the Q&A box. We will get to that shortly, but first I want to turn it over to Jack Miniati. Jack will be presenting our calls to action for the evening. And Jack is a 2020 Energy Fellow with the URI Cooperative Extension, interning with National Grid's Rhode Island Customer Energy Management Group, and a senior of the Environmental and Natural Resources Economics Program at URI. So Jack, take it away.
So,
Oh, technology.
yeah. Am I muted here? Sorry, this is...
You're not. I unmuted you. And so just when you hit share, you probably have to share a different screen.
Okay, I'm not. Okay, sorry about that.
That's okay. So folks, while Jack loads his presentation up, I just again direct your attention to the Q&A. I see a couple questions came into the chat, and we will get to those with Weezie, but feel free to enter questions for Weezie in the Q&A, and then also for Jack if you have any. And take it away, Jack.
All right, sorry for that slight technical difficulties, and thank you very much for that introduction. So I am Jack Miniotti. I am a 2020 URI Energy Fellow and currently interning with National Grid's Rhode Island Customer Energy Management Group. And today I will be sharing ways that you can utilize what you have learned to become more informed and involved with your personal energy consumption. So we have compiled 5 calls to action that hopefully you will all take advantage of at some point in the future. And these include learning how to read your energy bill, downloading the ISO to Go app, joining voluntary demand response programs, reading the ISO New England Regional Electricity Outlooks 2020 report, and participating in regional consumer liaison group meetings. So we'll start off with the first one, learning how to read your energy bill. This slide is an example of an average monthly energy bill, and while it is slightly outdated and the rates are not currently up to date, I will be going through each of those charges that you can see on the screen individually in the following slides to help you get a better understanding of the different components of your energy bill. So the energy bill is split into 2 primary components, which are delivery services and supply services. As you can see, there are a variety of individual charges that fall under delivery services, and I will touch on each one of those individually in the upcoming slides. So our first charge under delivery services is the customer charge, which is a fixed rate of $6 per month. And this covers the cost of services including meter reading, billing, administrative costs, and more. And this charge applies to all customers, regardless of if they have solar panels on their roof or some other sort of distributed generation. Additionally, we have the LIHEAP enhancement charge, which is a fixed charge of 80 cents per month. And this funds the Low-Income Home Energy Assistance Program alongside federal grants. This program is a federal social services program aimed to assist low-income households in meeting their home energy needs. Moving on, we have the distribution energy charge, which is a volumetric rate of roughly 5 cents per kilowatt hour. And this pays for the cost of delivery of generated power from substations through power lines to your home. We also have the energy efficiency programs charge, again, volumetric at roughly 1 cent per kilowatt hour or less. And this funds state and utility energy efficiency measures, which are offered to consumers through National Grid. We additionally have the renewable energy distribution charge, also volumetric at roughly 1 cent per kilowatt hour, and this funds state renewable energy measures and job growth throughout Rhode Island. We also have the transmission charge, which is volumetric at roughly 2 cents per kilowatt hour, And this funds the cost of delivering electricity from power generating facilities to utility substations. And we also have the transition charge, which is volumetric at roughly 8 cents per kilowatt hour. And this charge allows the utility to recover costs associated with payments to its wholesale supplier for terminating those wholesale arrangements. Our final delivery service charge is the Renewable Energy Growth Program, and this is a fixed rate of $1.90 per month. This program supports the development of distributed generation projects throughout Rhode Island, and eligible technologies within this program include wind, solar, hydropower, and anaerobic digestion. This program enables customers to sell their generation output under long-term tariffs at fixed prices. So that brings us into the supply services charge portion of your bill. And these charges are directly associated with the electricity that is being consumed. Consumers have the option of selecting National Grid or a competitive supplier. And depending on the competitive supplier chosen, they can have rates that are either higher or lower than National Grid's rates. Some consumers will opt for higher rates due to the fact that those competitive suppliers receive their energy from renewable sources, and they are willing to pay more for the environmentally conscious route of receiving energy. While National Grid generally utilizes the wholesale market, which includes sourcing from fossil fuels, nuclear, and renewables, they are now offering a Green Up program, which supplies energy from only the green sources, and customers can choose to enroll in that program. Additionally, in recent years, we are seeing community choice aggregation beginning to emerge in Rhode Island, and this allows local governments to procure power on behalf of their residents from an alternative supplier while receiving transmission and distribution services from the existing utility, which in most cases would be National Grid. And that brings us on to our second call to action, which is downloading the ISO to Go app. And this is an app that you can get on your phone or tablet, and it is very user-friendly and available for free on the Google Play and App Store platforms. This app contains a pricing map, including day-ahead and real-time prices for all 8 zones within our region, as well as the New England hub. Additionally, the app contains past, present, and future electricity demand curves, as well as fuel mix data, which provides information regarding energy sources that are powering New England at any given time. Finally, there are customizable notifications that can send alerts directly to your phone in the scenario where there is a power system abnormalities or if pricing reaches certain thresholds. And here are examples, screenshots from the app of left to right. We have the pricing map and then the demand curve chart. And finally, on the right is the fuel mix. And up top there is the little icon that you will see in either the Google Play or App Store when you are downloading. That brings us to our third call to action, which is joining voluntary demand response programs. National Grid offers such a program called Connected Solutions to Rhode Island residential and business customers. By reducing electricity use during peak hours, you can reduce emissions, infrastructure costs, and utility prices. And to incentivize people to do this, participants in this program can receive up to $35 per kilowatt during these peak energy events. And these peak energy events are scheduled throughout the summer for a total of 20 hours. However, they are each individual event is no longer than 4 hours long, and they all take place on weekdays between 11 a.m. and 5 p.m. So during these peak energy events, customers can reduce energy consumption and save money by turning off unnecessary lights, appliances, and equipment, and by raising the temperature of central air conditioning systems. Our fourth call to action is to read the ISO New England Regional Electricity Outlooks for 2020. This is a report that highlights many key factors impacting New England's energy industry, both currently and into the future. One of these key factors are the state goals throughout the region, which primarily focus on providing cleaner, lower cost powers for all customers while also encouraging innovation and preventing unwise investments. The report also highlights ISO's role in planning, innovating, and enabling a reliable clean energy grid. Energy security is also highlighted as a priority, and with a focus on reliably operating a future power grid containing a high penetration of renewable resources. And finally, ISO expresses their focus on the future and describes their strategies towards sustaining a power grid that can support a carbon-free economy and society. Our fifth and final call to action is to participate in regional consumer liaison group meetings. These meetings are a forum for the exchange of information between ISO New England and electricity consumers throughout the region. These meetings occur 4 times per year, and every meeting is open to the public. These meetings include guest speakers from industry executives, policymakers, and regulators, as well as panel discussions and ISO updates on regional energy issues and initiatives that could impact electricity pricing. And the next meeting of the Consumer Liaison Group is actually tomorrow, December 2nd, from 12:30 to 2:30 p.m. This is titled Clean Energy and Regional Markets, the New England States and Other Visions of the Future. And I highly encourage you all to attend. I'm sure it will be very informative. And so that concludes our calls to action. Thank you for your time. I'd like to remind you, if you have any questions, to please submit them into the Q&A, and I encourage you all to take advantage of these opportunities to become more informed about your energy consumption.
Thank you so much, Jack. Great job. Very proud of you. So everyone, I will offer up our speakers, Weezie and Jack, for your questions. We do have a couple coming in here. There's 3 in the Q&A, a couple in the chat. So I'm going to actually start with questions that came into the chat. And Kyle is asking you, Weezie, why you think there's so little interest in nuclear energy.
It's a good question, Kyle, and you know, it's tough. Some policymakers have come around on nuclear, and you know, they see the benefits of all that carbon-free energy. I mentioned that Millstone Nuclear Power Station produces roughly 16 to 17 million megawatt hours of carbon-free electricity on this very small footprint of land, 500 acres of land. It's very reliable. It's always on, running 24/7. You know, I think maybe states will come around when there are some more advanced nuclear options like small modular reactors. You know, for right now, we don't see any major nuclear power plants being proposed in the region. You know, those are very, very capital intensive projects, very expensive. I think that's another reason, you know, there's a lack of interest, so to speak. But I think that over time, advanced nuclear options like small modular reactors could really play a big role in helping the region decarbonize.
Great. So let's see. Adam is asking, this is a great question. Are there concerns about vulnerabilities in the distribution infrastructure due to climate change, including more frequent and extreme storms and wind events? That's part 1. And then part 2 is who is responsible for addressing climate adaptation and what efforts are underway? It's kind of a 4-part question. So
yeah, so I'll hand that over to Jack. No. Well, no, Jack, feel free to jump in from the National Grid perspective. But I will say, you know, the distribution systems, they are managed. You know, they are managed by our electric distribution companies like National Grid and EverSource, and you know, they are seeing the impacts of climate change. I mean, you're seeing substations getting flooded when there are big weather events like hurricanes. So, you know, they are responsible for studying the distribution system and making the upgrades that are needed to, adapt the system and ensure that it's reliable, secure, and reliable going out into the future. ISO New England is the entity responsible for studying the transmission system and developing transmission solutions to make sure the transmission system is secure and reliable going into the future. I think that it's really a collective effort to make sure that we're including, climate change impacts when we assess the vulnerability of the grid and make the necessary upgrades. Jack, anything to add?
No, I think you about covered it. Sorry, I was sending over a link to the liaison group meeting tomorrow, so I wasn't fully attentive, but it sounded like you got the majority of it.
Sounds good. Thanks, Jack.
Yeah, I think it's a good question, Adam, because the utilities are responsible for distribution, but we have to collectively agree that that's a good investment to head these things off at the pass. And so, this climate change issue is one of the reasons, as Jack was talking about, that getting involved in some of these groups that are looking for public input is so important, like the liaison group Jack mentioned. Also in Rhode Island, I just mentioned that one of the surcharges on our utility bills for energy efficiency, that 1 cent-ish per megawatt or kilowatt, hour, that funds the Energy Efficiency and Resource Management Council, which is a group that actually gets together every month and talks about how to invest the energy efficiency dollars from our bills into programs. And so that is, technically, when you break it down, our money. And they're getting together, and all of those meetings are public, and they encourage public participation. So I'm ranting a little bit, but it's really important. One of the things we hope folks walk away from this session with is a little bit of empowerment to get involved, because these issues are heady, but they are things that we can have input on. And so, the more you know, as they say. So Gavaskar, yes. I think that's our generation, Weezie, but maybe not. Gavaskar, who I just met last week in an interview, and I want to make sure I'm asking his question. I think it's in terms of, so I will read it, and then we'll see if we're getting the gist. So he's saying, during the peak period of solar power, the middle of the day, reducing the need for power from power stations doesn't sunset, which causes the need for energy from power stations to suddenly increase the recapture of their profits that would have been lost during daytime use of solar. So a trade-off, I guess, between how distributed generation or power going onto the grid takes away from other forms of generation and how that all kind of works. I'll leave that one to you, Weezie.
It's a good question. I think I know exactly where he's going with that. So when solar is, in the middle of the day, and all of those solar panels are helping meet local energy needs, and on a wholesale level across the region, the demand for electricity is very low. It looks very low, and power prices are very low because of that. So you're right. Resources on the grid, your traditional power resources, they're not running, so they're not making revenues in the energy market. And if they are running, they're, because the demand is reduced so low, wholesale energy prices are probably very low, so they're making little revenue. Are those recaptured, when you start to see the sun falling off and demand for electricity ramping up? Possibly, if you're one of those resources that can ramp up very quickly and help and be dispatched by ISO New England to help meet the demand for electricity, you will be capturing those energy market revenues as you run. Whether those power prices are very high depends on, how much power is needed, how quickly it's needed. If it's a really, really hot day, if something breaks and trips offline, and even more resources are needed. So there are many factors that go into the actual price of energy in that hour as energy demand is ramping up. So some resources that are quite flexible are able to capture some of those revenues.
One more reason to download that ISO to Go app. You can follow this stuff. So we will end with a question from our friend Albert Larson, who's asking or commenting that it's quite interesting that grid usage is down, or grid usage down has declined over the last decade. Are maximum summer and winter consumption data available for the recent past?
Yes, absolutely. ISO New England has a ton of data available on energy usage, going back to 2000, where all of our, where all of our energy is being generated. So you've got just a ton of data available on the ISO New England app, on the ISO New England website, as well as the app. And you could really spend, you could really spend a whole day, week, or month going down several rabbit holes on the ISO New England site. So yes, energy consumption data is available. It's available even on a state-by-state basis, as well as across the ISO New England control area.
Awesome. Well, Weezie, we're going to keep it to just about an hour. Thank you so much for your time and sharing your knowledge. I could listen to this all day from you. We're really lucky to have you. And Jack, you're the man. Great job. And everyone, please stay tuned to our YouTube channel for a recording of this session. And I would be remiss if I didn't mention next Tuesday at 7, December 8th, we have another webinar coming up, another energy-related webinar. So please tell all of your friends and family to join us here at 7 p.m. We'll have Dr. Todd Bianco and Emma Rodvian from the Rhode Island Public Utilities Commission. They are very, very intelligent folks, and they're going to talk to us about the future of New England's cleaner energy system. So please save the date for that, December 8th at 7 p.m. Weezie, hope to see you at a NUI event soon. Jack, I'll see you at your presentation next week. Thanks to all of you for joining us tonight. Take care and stay healthy.